Welcome to this session called Bullying and Other Forms of Violence. My name is Julia Hovendal, and I have the honor to be your host during this 55 minutes. We will listen to 3 speakers who will each hold a 15 minutes presentation. And during the last 10 minutes of this session, you will be able to ask questions to the speakers. Everyone participating online, please use the Q&A function. And everyone here in this room, please use the QR code. In both cases, please specify to which speaker you are addressing your question to. And now, let me introduce and welcome the first speaker, Maria Wiertsma. And your presentation is called the Intergenerational Transmission of Peer Aggression. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Maria. And today, I want to talk about our paper in which we examined the intergenerational transmission of peer aggression. I conducted the paper together with our colleagues Charlotte, Roosmarijn and Tina, and it's part of the CAPE project. And in this CAPE project, we examined the consequences of adolescent peer experiences across generations and across social context. All right, a little bit about the background of peer aggression and of intergenerational transmission. So children and adolescents who aggress against their peers have an increased risk on the development of social and mental problems, such as depression, but also peer problems. They also have an increased risk of more aggressive behavior later in life, for example, against their offspring, but also against their partner. We were interested in even in looking beyond the consequences of the aggressions themselves and focused whether peer aggression would transmit to the next generation, so from parents to offspring. Information about this transmission is important to understand and to prevent a dominant change of peer problems behavior within a family. So we know from general non-peer aggressive behavior and other antisocial behaviors that they are transmitted to the next generation. For instance, antisocial mothers and fathers are more likely to have children who display conduct problems. And children with parents involved in criminal behavior have a higher risk of engaging in criminal behavior themselves. So if peer aggression is comparable with antisocial behavior and with criminal behavior, it seems logical to assume that also peer aggression would be transmitted to the next generation. So far, however, research on this transmission, specifically on peer aggression, is scarce and inconclusive. One study did find that father's bullying perpetration was transmitted to the offspring, whereas another study did not find evidence for transmission of father's peer teasing. It is important to note here that both studies were based on high-risk samples. So how would the transmission of peer aggression work? Intergenerational transmission of peer aggression can be seen as a process of socialization that guides rules and norms that guide behavior are transmitted from one generation to the next. For instance, peer aggressive might turn into parents who hold positive attitudes towards peer aggression and engage in harsh parenting practices, and in this way promote and justify aggressive behaviors to their offspring. And we know that children learn from imitating and observing behavior in their own setting, in their family setting, for example, and apply those behaviors in another context, for example, the peer context. So parental aggression can thus be seen as a model for children to observe and to learn from parental aggression and apply those aggressive behaviors within their own peer context. So we used the 1970 British cohort study to prospectively examine the intergenerational transmission of peer aggression and the role of harsh parenting within this transmission. It's a population-based cohort study, and it captures parental peer aggression in childhood and adolescence at multiple time points, and includes also data on the offspring peer aggression. And it also allowed us to make a distinction between child parental peer aggression and adolescent peer aggression. And this distinction is important because child peer aggression has partly different outcomes and different predictors compared to adolescent peer aggression. For child peer aggression, it's often assumed that it's more of an indication of mental issues, in the sense that they don't have a better way to react to certain situations. And for adolescent peer aggression, it's often a strategy to obtain a certain goal, for example, popularity. So child peer aggression and adolescent peer aggression are very distinctive forms of aggression. For our study, we expected that parental peer aggression, dus G1, would be transmitted to their offspring, G2, and that harsh parenting would explain this transmission. I see the arrow for the second arrow is in the wrong way. It has to go downstairs, but I hope you all understand that. A little bit about our methods. As I said, we used the 1970 British cohort study to examine this transmission. And this is an ongoing longitudinal cohort study which follows the lives and the development of more than 70,000 individuals. And for our study, we used the following waves. When G1, dus the parents, were 5 years old, were 10 years old, and were 16 years old, and also when they were 34 years old. And in the latest wave, we also had data on the offspring of the peer aggression of the offspring and on their harsh parenting. And based on the age of the offspring, we created 3 subsamples. So we had a subsample, as you can see in the model below, we had a subsample for G2 age 3 to 5, when the offspring was age 6 to 9, and when the offspring was 10 to 16. And for each subsample, we tested whether child or adolescent peer aggression would predict offspring parent aggression. It's also important to note here that the parents of G1 reported on the peer aggression of G1 in their childhood and adolescence, and that G1 reports on their own harsh parenting and on the peer aggression of their offspring. So a little bit about our findings, a short summary, as you can see here in the model. When we tested the intergenerational transmission of peer aggression, we can conclude that we did not find consistent supports or a consistent pattern of support for such a transmission, because as you can see here, child parental peer aggression predicted offspring peer aggressions for the age group 3 to 5 and 10 to 16. And adolescent peer aggression predicted offspring peer aggressions for the age group 3 to 5 and 6 to 9. And for the subsamples in which we did find a significant association between parental peer aggression and offspring peer aggression, we included harsh parenting as a mediator to test whether that would explain the transmission pathway. And we also did not find a consistent pattern of support for this harsh parenting mediating effect, because as you can see here, the only subsample in which harsh parenting fully explained the transmission pathway was for the G1 adolescent peer aggression and the offspring age 6 to 9 subsample. So based on our results, we can conclude that we don't have support for the transmission of peer aggression, nor for mediating effects of harsh parenting. So our inconsistent results are in line with previous studies, and it might imply that the transmission of peer aggression is less straightforward and perhaps also more complex than, for example, a transmission of criminal behavior. And this is likely due to that peer aggression is more context dependent, because you can imagine that children in classrooms where peer aggression is negatively evaluated and also punished, those children are more prone to change their behavior and therefore a discontinuity of the transmission, compared to children in classroom where peer aggression is positively evaluated and perhaps even celebrated by gaining more popularity and more high social status in the peer group. And those children are perhaps also more likely to transmit those behaviors. It's also the different characteristics of peer aggression might also explain whether or not peer aggression would be transmitted. because you can imagine that children with with a stable peer aggression throughout their life, and also with stable peer aggression, with a stable behavior within the peer aggression itself, so really frequent peer aggressive behavior, are also more likely to transmit those behaviors. For future direction, for future research, it's important to also look at the influence of the other parents, because for our own research, we only looked at the transmission from one parent to the offspring, and in this way have neglected, in the sense of saying, the influence of the other parents. But the other parent has also their own experiences, their own behavior, and thus might act as a kind of barrier against the transmission. So it will be valuable to include information of both parents and their developmental history to really explore and research an intergenerational transmission. And secondly, we only used parent-reported peer aggression and harsh parenting, and have just the perspective of peers and teachers are lacking in our study, but especially peers have a more true account of peer aggression, as peer aggression occurs often in the peer context. We did replicate our study with another data cohort. This is the National Child Development Study, also a longitudinal study, but we have the same conclusions in this data, that we don't have consistent support for an intergenerational transmission of peer aggression, nor for a mediating effect of harsh parenting. So I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that the way forward might be to include information of both parents and their developmental history, but also to include information about other child or contextual factors that explain more the intergenerational transmission processes. That's it. Thank you. Can I just leave it there?
Thank you so much, Maria. We will see you again when it's time for questions. So if you have a question right now, please send it in, and don't forget to mention Maria's name so we know that the question is for her. Now it's time for our next speaker, Kari Stamland Gusfre, and the presentation is called Downwards Bullying Transmission. How do bullying by teachers relate to bullying by peers? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kari Stamland Gusfre, and I'm working at the Norwegian Center for Learning Environment. I'm going to present this study, which was conducted by 3 colleagues of mine, which was Erling Roland, Hilgun Fandrem, Janne Støen, which is here, and myself. The title of this study, as you said, is Downwards Bullying Transmission. How do bullying by teachers relate to bullying by peers? As you all know, until today, this definition has been the most widely used, both in research and in schools' practices, to describe bullying among students. As far as we know, there is no correspondingly clear and established definition of bullying between teacher and students. In the survey used in this study, is based on this existing definition. The criteria of power imbalance is already present in a teacher-student relationship. And if teacher uses this position to act negatively, repeatedly, this situation fits with the, for now, definition of bullying. The background for this study is the Norwegian school context, where teacher bullying is addressed in the Education Act, Chapter 9A5. This section makes it clear that bullying or any other kind of harassment from teacher or other employees must be reported to and handled by the principal. The Norwegian school context was probably also the first place where teacher bullying was studied. Olveus conducted a pioneering study in Norway in 1996, in which approximately 2% of students reported being bullied by teachers. Later, just a few other studies on the same topic have been conducted in different countries. A scoping review identified 38 studies, and from this, it can be concluded that teacher bullying occurs in all school environments around the world, although there are some methodological challenges related to how bullying is defined across the studies included in the mentioned review. Despite this review brings basic knowledge to the field concerning prevalence of teacher bullying, type of negative behavior, consequences, risk factors, and measures and prevention. And we also know in Norway there is also reports from the National Annual Pupil Survey, which is written every year. The aim of this study was to compare teacher bullying and peer bullying to see how being exposed to teacher bullying correlates with and influences being exposed to bullying of students, traditionally and online. More precisely, our research question were: the first, how does prevalence differ between students bullied by teacher and students bullied by peers? Is this ratio the same at different age levels and for girls and boys? Traditional peer bullying compared to cyberbullying by peers was also addressed. And second, downwards bullying transmission, which we call DBT. Does being bullied by teacher influence the risk of being bullied by peers? We also related this to age, gender, and different forms of bullying. The sample consists of a large data file from the Norwegian Annual Pupil Survey from 2018. It is mandatory for schools to conduct the survey on 7th, 10th, and 11th grades, and it's voluntary from 5th grade and above. As you can see, the number of the respondents is very high and constitutes approximately 90% of all students at the relevant grade levels. A Likert scale was used, and the data were analyzed by using SPSS software. Examining the percentages of students bullied traditionally and by electronic means together, we see there is a decrease as age increases. Differentiating by gender, we note that compared to the bullying rates for boys, the bullying rates are higher for girls in primary and lower secondary school, but lower for girls in upper secondary schools. Notably, the percentage concerning girls is almost half from grade 10 to the first year in upper secondary school. The table also shows percentage of bullying of students by teacher, written in red. A total of 2.1% of students reported being bullied by teachers, and the percentage is substantially higher for boys, which is 2.1, than for girls, which is 1.6. However, the difference between girls and boys is small among the youngest. In contrast, the highest percentage is for students in grade 10. The correlations The correlation between different types of bullying are reported in this table. Teacher bullying means being bullied by a teacher, and traditional peer bullying and peer cyberbullying mean being bullied by peers in those ways. As a Likert scale was used to estimate teacher bullying, traditional peer bullying, and peer cyberbullying, Pearson's correlations for the relationships between these variables are reported. However, total peer bullying is constructed as a variable with a range of 0–1. We therefore report Spearman's correlation, as you can see in the top row here, for the relationships between for the relationship between this variable and the three other variables. The results reveal that all correlations are positive. There is a rather strong correlation between traditional peer bullying and peer cyberbullying, which is accordance with former research. Spearman's correlation between teacher bullying and total peer bullying is 0.21 for boys and 0.17 for girls, written in red. The results also show that Pearson's correlation between teacher bullying and traditional peer bullying and peer cyberbullying are stronger than those between total peer bullying and teacher bullying, which can be explained by the different formulas for the two different correlations calculation model. The main result is that the correlation between being bullied by teacher and being bullied by students is not very strong, but slightly stronger for boys than for girls. This table shows the percentages of students bullied by peers when not bullied by teachers, written in black, and when bullied by teacher, written in red. We use the estimate total peer bullying for being bullied in a traditional way and either or peer cyberbullying. Comparing the results, we conclude that the risk of being bullied by peers, as reported by students, is dramatically higher when students are also bullied by a teacher. Using the total figures, the risk factor is nearly 9 times higher for boys who are bullied by teacher and approximately 7 times higher than for girls. As this study aimed to explore how teacher bullying is related to peer bullying, we need to discuss the findings that showed a rather weak correlation between being bullied by teacher and being bullied by peers. This weak correlation could easily and misleading be concluded that being bullied by teacher is not any significant risk factor for being bullied by peers. However, we think that this risk may be camouflaged as being bullied by teacher is much less frequent than being bullied by peers. Only a minority of the students reported being bullied by a teacher, but among this minority, approximately 1/3 answered that peers bullied them traditionally and either or by electronic means. And this proportion is nearly 10 times more than among those who have not been bullied by a teacher. The next question then is which dynamics could explain this overlap between being bullied by teacher and bullied by peers? When discussing this, it's worth noting that the risk of being bullied by electronic means, which presumably takes place without any communication with the teacher, is also much higher when the student is bullied by a teacher. One possible reason might be response bias. The rather weak correlation between being bullied by peers and being bullied by teacher does not indicate such a general bias correspondence. However, this possibility cannot be neglected. Former research has revealed that risk factors for being bullied by peers could be related to emotional problems, for instance, anxiety. Since the risk factor seem to be different, according to the mentioned review, behavior problems are one risk factor for being a target of teacher bullying. Since the risk factor seems to be different, the overlap of targets may be caused by hierarchical upward transition. Very different word. This means that the student is first bullied by peers based on the main risk factors for such bullying, and then a teacher joins in. However, approximately 3 times as many students are bullied by peers as by teachers. Thus, upward transition is ultimately a weak dynamic. Since the risk for being bullied by peers increases nearly 10 times if bullied by teachers, downwards transmission is much more probable. Our hypothesis is therefore that teacher bullying of students transmit downwards to peer bullying of students, which we call DBT. Earlier research show that bullying of students by teacher is a serious matter and can cause great long-term effects to those who are exposed to it. When students are bullied by both teacher and peers, the consequences may be even worse. And Section 9A5 in the Norwegian Education Act states a strict obligation to act if someone working at the school is bullying a student. However, in practice, if teachers see or know that a colleague is bullying a student, they can feel excessive discomfort from intervening or filing a report to the school management. And for a teacher who has allegedly bullied a student, the situation can also be very difficult. Although bullying by teacher must be taken very, very seriously, the affected student or observers may have misunderstood or misinterpreted the situation. And additionally, some students may want to punish a teacher for various reasons. For example, because of unfair grading. Thus, they make false accusation because they want revenge. An evaluation of Chapter 9a and practices in schools show that the topic of teacher bullying is mainly discussed in schools that have experienced a case of teacher bullying. Accordingly, few schools address this topic before they have a case. This huge complexity of such cases makes it clear that school leaders need clear guidelines and procedures to rely on when they are mapping and handling cases in which teachers have bullied students or have been accused to do so. It is necessary for schools to handle the topic of teacher bullying with the utmost seriousness and include this topic in their professional development and anti-bullying efforts. Such inclusion must mainly be performed as preventive measure to reduce the risk of students being bullied by a teacher. The topic should also be addressed in teacher education institutions. To justify the hypothesis of DBT, we draw on social theory and our own main result. In addition, we refer to other research concerning feature of victims of teacher and peers. Nevertheless, the latter justification concerning characteristics possess a weakness, as we do not know the appearances of students' victims when controlling for teachers' victims. This can be solved by creating mutually exclusive categories. For example, students not bullied, students bullied by peers only, students bullied by teacher only, and students bullied by both teacher and peers. And by investigating conduct problems and emotional problems within these categories. A longitudinal study following students and eventually teacher over some times will be the best design for testing our hypothesis. Another issue is that one teacher or several may bully the same student. This issue raises the question of how high the percentages of students bullied by peers would be if students are bullied by one or several teachers. A further question is whether the risk of being bullied by peers increases differently if only one versus two or more students in the same classroom are bullied by a teacher. An additional aspect is school culture in cases of bullying of students by teacher. The mentioned review shows that teachers may be aware that colleagues bully students, and in some cases, they know who these colleagues are. More in-depth studies on the topic should provide valuable insights into school cultures and how teachers see themselves as being responsible for the learning environment for all students. Being bullied hurts, and it's important to learn more about how harmful the combined bullying of teacher and peers is. And this question can also be answered by longitudinal research, and I'm nearly there. In general, bullying of students by teacher is a sensitive issue that can be challenging both for practice and research. The sensitivity of the topic can also affect the willingness of schools to allow researchers to ask questions to school employees, students, and parents. Therefore, further research needs to build on high ethical standards. I have forgot to change the picture. Sorry about that, but I have been talking so much. Therefore, further research needs to build on high ethical standards and establish trust within the field of practice so that the published results reflect multiple perspectives of this sensitive topic. Sorry about that, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Ann-Kathrin Wiemann. I'm a research associate in the Department of Psychology at Bielefeld University, and I'm very much looking forward to presenting today some of the first results from one of our current studies, where I will focus on the role of lifetime polyvictimization as a predictor for recent bullying victimization among youth in care, considering the role of internalizing problems. First of all, I would like to speak about why it is important to consider the role or the situation of youth in care specifically. As for the term of youth in care, I'm going to use it to include both youth living in foster families as well as in adoptive families. It has been found that youth in care have often been affected by child maltreatment previously in their lives. In fact, child maltreatment is among one of the most common reasons for allocating children to an alternative placement setting. But when looking at these adverse experiences of youth in care, it has often been observed that there was not only one form of victimization, but that many of these children had been exposed to many different forms of victimization. For example, that they not only experienced physical violence towards themselves, but that they were also emotionally abused, or that they were subjected to watching violence between the parents or towards their siblings. This condition of experiencing several types of victimization and their cumulative effects has become known as polyvictimization, which has been associated with severe mental health problems for those affected by it. For example, in terms of developing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, or anxiety. Now, foster or adoptive families can give these children a new home, a safe environment, and a chance for new relationships. However, there are still studies that indicate that these children remain to have a high probability for further victimization, for example, in the form of bullying. And that is why we wanted to examine what possible risk factors could be for this high chance of bullying victimization among youth in care, and we wanted to include the risk factor polyvictimization. Now, I've already briefly defined the term, and I would like to further add that polyvictimization has been associated with more severe mental health problems than multiple episodes of the same form of victimization, even when considering severe forms of victimization like child maltreatment. It has also been found that controlling for polyvictimization reduced or eliminated the impact of individual forms of victimization, stressing the importance of including and considering this risk factor polyvictimization. Now, it's important to consider that bullying can, of course, become part of this polyvictimization aggregate, which is why we wanted to look at the mechanisms behind the spreading of victimization across different areas of lives. It has been found that the patterns of polyvictimization become increasingly more complex from childhood to adolescence and from adolescence to adulthood as new environments like school or work life become more relevant. Now, it has been found that internalizing problems can mediate the association between child maltreatment and bullying victimization. And as polyvictimization is also a strong predictor for internalizing problems, and in some cases even a stronger predictor than just a single form of victimization, we wanted to test whether this mediation also accounts for the association between lifetime polyvictimization and the most recent bullying victimization of youth in care. Therefore, we developed the following hypothesis. First of all, we expected that youth in care experience bullying victimization more often than youth living with their biological families. Second, we expected that lifetime polyvictimization is associated with recent bullying victimization. Most of our knowledge is based upon more general populations, therefore most often youth living in their biological families. But as we know that the numbers of polyvictimization are very high among youth in care, we expected that this association will also be found among youth in care. And finally, we expected that this association is mediated by internalizing problems. Now, currently, the final participants are in the process of completing our survey. Therefore, the results I present today will be based upon a preliminary subsample. By September 2021, 88 youth in care had completed our survey together with one of their social parents, and that included both foster and adoptive families. Also, 101 youth living with their biological families completed a survey together with one of their biological parents. Our questionnaires were presented online and included the bullying screener developed by Wolke and colleagues to assess the bullying involvement in the past 6 months, and this screening instrument allows to define different roles in bullying. We also used the juvenile victimization questionnaire to assess the lifetime poly-victimization. This is a questionnaire that consists of 33 items, each representing a different form of victimization. These items can be grouped in 5 modules, among which are child maltreatment and peer and sibling victimization, to which I'm going to return shortly. But it also allows to build a total sum score of all different forms of previous victimization experiences. And finally, we use the child behavior checklist, or respectively the youth self-report, to assess internalizing problems. I would like to point out that we presented the juvenile victimization questionnaire and the youth self-report only to youth aged 11 years or older due to the age recommendations of these questionnaires, but the caregiver report is based upon caregivers of all participants, therefore 8 to 21, which will be marked in the upcoming results. Now, this table shows that most of our participants indicated to have not been involved in bullying or to have made experiences with bullying victimization in the past 6 months. When looking at perpetrators or bully victims, the prevalence numbers were quite low or not at all present. Therefore, we decided to exclude participants that have been either identified as bullies or as bully victims through self-report or caregiver report, resulting in these final numbers, which we then included for further analysis. Coming back to our first hypothesis, we found that youth in care do experience bullying victimization more often than youth living with their biological families. When testing wherever lifetime bullying victimization is a predictor for recent bullying victimization among youth in care, we did find significant associations for both caregiver and self-report, indicating that a higher number of previous victimization experiences is associated with an increased risk of bullying victimization for youth in care. And here we found similar results also when we excluded the items measuring peer and sibling victimization from the lifetime poly-victimization sum score. Now, when entering internalizing problems in this mediation model, we found that poly-victimization is for both caregiver report and self-report a significant predictor for internalizing problems and bullying victimization. However, we did not find a significant indirect effect, regardless of wherever the items on peer and sibling victimization were included or not. Therefore, we could not support this hypothesis. Now, in contrast, when we look at the youth living in their biological families, we did not find a significant association between poly-victimization and bullying victimization. Again, regardless wherever the items on peer and sibling victimization were included in the lifetime poly-victimization sum score or not. However, when looking at the mediation model, we did find a significant indirect effect for both caregiver and self-report, indicating that internalizing problems mediate the association between poly-victimization and bullying victimization for youth living with their biological families. To summarize, youth in care experience bullying victimization more often than youth living with their biological families. Lifetime poly-victimization is a predictor for recent bullying victimization of youth in care, and a mediating effect of internalizing problems could be observed for biological families. Now, especially when looking at the measurement of lifetime poly-victimization, several implications might be discussed in terms of interpreting our results. First of all, while we did not include the age at the onset of the different forms of victimization experiences, it might be possible that the developmental stage at which the victimization occurs plays into this relationship. Also, while previous studies showed that polyvictimization is a better predictor, at least for internalizing problems, than the number of episodes of a single form of victimization, it might be important to consider whether it was a single event or a more chronic stressor to which the children were scored. And finally, especially when looking at the youth in care, it might be important to consider whether there are specific combinations of victimization experiences, because the total score of polyvictimization accounts for all victimization experiences equally. And of course, there are also some general methodological limitations. First of all, our studies were conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic, which might have confounded the constructs in our analysis. We had, especially in this preliminary subsample, quite small samples, and it was a cross-sectional study. Now, for future research, it might be interesting to look not only at the association of lifetime polyvictimization and bullying victimization, but also at bullying perpetration. Also, when considering a bigger sample, it might be very interesting to look for effects of different family placement settings, like, for example, kinship care versus non-kinship care, short-term and long-term care. And especially when looking at the association of lifetime polyvictimization and bullying victimization of youth in care, further mediators might be considered, like attachment, cognitive functioning, social skills, or emotion regulation, to get a better understanding of this chain of spreading victimization and to stop it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann-Katrin. Now we're going over to the last part of this session, and it's the Q&A. So if you have a question, please send it in, because now we don't have much more time left. I have a question for Maria here. So we start with this. Can you explain why you used 3 different Generation 2 age groups and did not analyze these age groups together?
Yeah, should I sit here or stand over there?
You can come up here.
All right. Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm not sure who, but yeah, we created 3 different subsamples because when you compare social behavior, it is important to compare those behaviors in one generation and in the second generations on comparable age time periods. So, and because of we had childhood parental aggression and adolescent peer aggression, and for the first generation, it was important to create subsamples that kind of compared to those age periods also for the next generations, so that social development is really comparable with each other. I hope that I explained that question, and otherwise let me know.
Thank you so much. We have one more question to Kari. Why do you think that boys are more bullied amongst teachers, and what can this have for consequence later in life? Hard question. Please come up.
I think maybe that has to do with the risk factor I mentioned, that a risk factor for being a target of teacher bullying are related to behavior problems. And maybe boys not behave more badly, but maybe they can, a teacher can experience as more challenging to have boys that maybe I am the mother of 4 boys. They can be more like to be more active maybe, So that can maybe be one reason. And for the consequences of life, we all know about the negative consequences of being bullied for both teacher and peers. And I think the consequences is quite as devastating for boys as for girls. Yes.
Thank you so much. We have one more question for Maria. You talked about harsh parenting. How did you define harsh parenting and what is included in that concept?
We had 3 items for harsh parenting. And if you have one moment, I will look at my items before I say something wrong. All right, so for harsh parenting, we had 3 items, which included shouted at child, told child off, and had to smack child. And those were all 3 measured at a 5-point Likert scale, so from 1 never to 5 daily. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was the last question we had. So now it's time to end this session. And I would like to extend my thanks to all the speakers and to the audience here in the room and online. I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you so much.